Yeah? That sound okay?
Yeah, your sound is connected here.
It's picking up? Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you guys for coming to this 3-hour workshop. Even though it's called Intro to Cyber and IT Security GRC, it is going to be a 3-hour workshop that focuses on a specific aspect of governance, risk, and compliance. And it will be a little more advanced, which I'll get into in a minute. But I just want to touch out that I just want to touch on a few things. This won't be a tool tutorial. This will be process driven. But the most important thing is hopefully you guys will walk away with something that you can actually implement tomorrow, if there's one action item, okay? Quick, brief intro about me. My name is Tori Henderson. I'm from the US. Been here in Singapore coming up on 3 years. Been in IT and cyber a little over 20 years. Seen all kind of things from the end customer side to the vendor side as well. Worked in SMEs, worked in large enterprises, supported large enterprises, especially here in Singapore. So been exposed to both the Western and the Eastern side of things. And in the process of all that, one of the things I have learned is changing my perspective on cybersecurity to be more adversary or threat actor focused in how I build security programs, which we won't get into too much today. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. But as you guys will, if you don't already know, you will soon learn that stopping attackers is almost impossible now. So now it's a matter of how do you contain and reduce the amount of compromise that can be happening, right? And that's a big part of frustrating adversaries with how you build your security programs. Right. Why this workshop matters, right? 6 objectives I want to go over. Number 1, but most importantly, is the premise. Organizations fail when control gaps are not translated into structured action. Is everybody here familiar with risk assessments? Has anyone been through a risk assessment? Has anybody dealt with security controls before?
I did, but that was like many years ago. When
Okay.
I was in the hospital. It's very familiar compared to what people are doing now.
Okay. Well, with risk assessments, you have your risk and then you have your controls that you put in place for those risks. One of the challenges is it's nice to put those controls on paper, but where's the evidence to prove that those controls actually work? And that's where you start to see gaps. Number 1 does the control actually do what it's supposed to do? And then number 2, what does that look like through the lens of a framework, which we'll get into a few framework examples. So yes, we'll talk about analyzing where controls fail, what's the impact and exposure of those gaps that are surfaced, how do those compare when it comes to, we'll compare some frameworks and talk about how those frameworks are relevant to the risks or to the controls. And then we'll talk about security program improvement, not necessarily building a security program, but taking an existing security program and improving it. Lastly, we'll talk about compliance and governance constraints, because there can be a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to managing your security program, and how to properly measure and maximize your security program. Okay. So, I want you to look at each one of these boxes and see if you fall in one of them, okay? Just take a few minutes and see if you fall in one of those boxes. Because in today's day and age, a lot of these individuals are now starting to have to deal with cyber GRC. In the past, maybe it was the GRC people, the compliance people, maybe it was the IT department, right? Maybe it was security professionals that were hired to own it. Well, today and age, IT managers now have to own it. CTOs, CIOs have to own it. Sometimes facility managers, office managers have to own it, depending on the size of the company. So, the key here is this workshop is meant for people who have a basic cybersecurity knowledge, because at the end of the day, all of these boxes need to have basic cybersecurity understanding, as well as exposure to the actual systems that they're managing and governing, right? GRC, individuals in the past, it's easy for them to do an assessment or an audit without really having an understanding of the systems. Those days are gone. GRC professionals now need to have a better understanding of the security systems that they're doing assessments on. So the reason why I bring this up is because this program or this workshop will be a little more advanced. This isn't a beginner workshop. So just want to put that out there real quickly. Okay, it's 3 hours. We're going to go through 3 different phases of the workshop. First phase will be a gap assessment. Second phase will be design program improvement, how you improve your security program. And then we'll talk about monitoring and evaluation. What we won't be doing is building an actual security program. So I don't want anybody to think that's going to be a takeaway. But you will be understanding how to take an existing security program and improve it. All right. One of the things that I hope you guys take away is how you change the way you view security programs. Whether it's from regulatory standards and frameworks, whether it's from looking at it through a threat-informed lens, which we'll talk about, whether it's through how to map those controls or control gaps back to frameworks, or even how to monitor what you already have in place. These are just the housekeeping rules. I hope to make this a little more interactive, right? It's a little smaller setting, more intimate setting, so I hope to make this a little more interactive. When you share things, I encourage you to anonymize it, to keep it confidential, but the important thing is you take away things and you're able to contextualize it to your own environment. We'll have a 10-minute break between phases 1 and 2. We'll also see if we can get another small break in between 2 and 3, depending on how time goes. Please keep your phone silent. Park any questions right now for the Q&A section, but then try to keep them relevant to the topics as well. For this workshop, we're going to use a fictitious company as an example to contextualize these concepts so they're not abstract in concept. The name of the company is Meridian SG. It's a fintech here in Singapore. Nice sized company, almost 300 people, doing about 3.2 billion in assets under management. Quite solid. And again, pride themselves on fintech and leading the fintech revolution. Why this example? Because what it does, it helps us to use Singapore-based frameworks and standards like MAS TRM, like PDPA. It allows us to talk about the various aspects of their environment, and it's a realistic Singapore threat profile. In the day, Singaporean companies are being targeted, and fintechs are very attractive for threat actors. All right, so let's jump into the first phase, gap assessment. Where do existing controls fail to address the risks that matter? Has anyone been through a gap assessment before? Has anyone been through an audit with an outside auditor that comes in and wants to look at your security program, maybe wants to look at what security tools you have in place, how you're protecting data, things of that nature, talk to the HR department, how they onboard, offboard, talk to legal as far as how they're handling contracts. It can be quite painful. It can be quite painful. But in the midst of it, it's very important. It's very important because there's a lot of time that isn't spent on doing gap assessments internally, except for when the auditors come. And one of the things as far as changing your perspective or changing your lens is how to be more proactively doing it yourself, right? Security programs should never be static. They should be constantly evolving. They should be constantly maturing. And part of that is testing them, evaluating them, validating them. Okay. You know your risks and controls but where are your current controls failing to address them? I just want to sit there for a minute. Has anybody here actually gone through and validated a control that's on paper to be able to show that here's evidence to prove that this control is actually protecting against this risk?
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Yeah. Has anybody here actually gone through and validated a control that maybe is on paper to prove that it's actually protecting against that risk? And it has evidence to say, yes, I can validate this control. Yes, it's on paper, it's on my risk register, but it's actually validated.
Well, when I was working in the hospital, we did, but that was 20 years ago.
Okay.
It was very limited, but we want to make sure that we do not leak out patient information by accident.
Yeah.
So we had to work with the IT department. We were on the marketing side.
Mhm.
We were collecting data for registration for our public forums and all that. So they had to register NEM, NRIC, very primitive stuff, but very basic stuff. But we had to ensure that this stuff was not leaked out by accident.
Yeah.
So we questioned on, we had to check with the IT department on
Mhm.
what are the things that they are doing to ensure that whatever we put out on the form page, like the
Right.
registration page,
Mhm.
doesn't get leaked out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they had to come up with the proper securities and all that.
And they should give you evidence to show you this is exactly, here's evidence that it's working.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's the key right there.
We did a few test tries and all that. We see for multiple logins and all that. So we try to see whether it's as secure as it claims to be.
Yep, perfect. See, that right there is what I'm talking about, right? The vast majority of companies do not do that. They accept it on paper, and if they do an interview and you say, yes, we're in place, we're getting it done, you know, we protect against this control, or we protect against this risk, they just check it off as, okay, it's protected, right? Yes?
So about this gap assessment, right? How often do companies do it? Let's say every year or every 2 years? Or?
It's a great question. That's the cadence of it is based upon your risk profile. It's based upon what you feel is appropriate, right? And that is understanding, once you understand the threats, once you understand the risks, that will determine how active you need to be in assessing your own controls.
For example, a hospital, for example.
Yes.
What is the timeline they do this assessment?
Right. So with a hospital or, you know, hospitals, manufacturing, financial institutions, even professional service providers, right? They should be doing their gap assessment should be way more active. Due to, you know, ransomware is hitting manufacturing and hospitals, they should be doing monthly, if not weekly, depending on certain controls they have in place, right? What we want to move towards is what's called a continuous validation, which that takes more technology because it's something that you have to automate. It's not something that we as people can do in a continuous fashion. Even on a daily basis, like we don't have the manpower to be able to validate all these things on a daily basis or even a weekly basis. That's one of the reasons why the cadence can be annual or quarterly or semi-annual. You know, so these are all the things you have to take into consideration, but you definitely want to move towards as real time as possible, depending on the risk, to make sure you don't need to adjust the control based upon that risk.
Question, is it possible, right, for those evaluations, right, to be separated by their functions, meaning, for example, for PPA and all that, right, they do that, but for finance, right, probably once a year and all that?
It can, but again, it's based upon the risk profile, right? It's always based upon the risk profile. But one of the other things that we'll talk about is how these processes are siloed amongst the departments, right? And that's one of the reasons why, you know, a lot of you have these gaps, and you have the fact that you can't answer a lot of these questions with evidence that controls are operating. And not only if they break down, what's your plan of action to remediate if you actually identify a gap? Okay? There's 3 areas that I want to focus on: control inventory, process to control map, and gap register. We're going to focus most of the time on gap register, but from an information perspective, is very important. If you don't even have an inventory of your controls, then how are you going to be able to assess them? Take it a step further. Those controls, you may have an inventory of them, but can you map them back to the critical and key assets in your environment? So you know definitively this particular control, this firewall, what is it protecting exactly, right? These are the key assets that are definitely protected if this firewall wasn't in place. These are the key assets that are definitely protected with this endpoint security. These are the key assets that are definitely protected if we put multi-factor authentication in place and make sure that we do a better job of protecting our identities, things of that nature. It's those gaps that get surfaced that end up going on your register. So the gap register is the anchor, and that's where we'll spend most of our time. The gap register in normal GRC lingo or nomenclature, you usually have a current state where you're at, you have a future state where you want to be, you have the identified gap, you have the impact of that gap, and you have your plan of action to remediate that gap. This should all be a part of your your gap register. So again, when it comes to risk assessments, there's a risk register. When it comes to gap assessments, there's a gap register. And they work hand in hand together, right? They work hand in hand together. It's not a project plan though, right? I want to be very careful. This is not a project plan. This is work that should be done, meaningful, effective work that should be done by the security team. There's 4 types of gaps, okay? Most security frameworks, if not all of them, they have the same concept, they just use different terminology. So for this workshop, we're going to use the terminology of absent, deficient, compensating, and insufficient. Absent is there's nothing there. Deficient, it kind of works a little bit, or it's partially covering, but not all the way. Compensating is we couldn't put the actual control in place that directly addresses it, so we've come up with an alternative way that we believe can be compensating and provide the level of protection to reduce the risk. And then of course there's insufficient, which again is a big question mark. We've got the controls in place, but we have no idea if they actually work. And we won't know if they actually work until we're attacked. It's one of the biggest challenges of security programs. They don't know if they actually work until a threat actor comes along and tries to attack them. Okay, so actually let me go back just for a few more minutes. I want you guys to spend a little time just looking at these because we're going to jump into a mini exercise.
What is DLP and GRC?
So DLP is data loss prevention or data leak prevention. DMARC. Yeah, DMARC is a part of email security that you put in place to protect against email spoofing. So these are configurations that you would put on your email servers to help protect against email spoofing and some of the other things along those lines and ensure the integrity is there. So these are more technical controls, but yes, that's what they are, right? It's an example. Again, it's a little more complicated, but like this would be an example of how you would create a DMARC control within your email security. And a lot of it has to do with DNS and so forth. So it's just an example. We won't get too far into it. But the main takeaway here is understanding your controls and what type of gaps there may be with your controls, right? The next slide is going to be a mini exercise. We're going to take about 7 minutes. What I want to do is I want to break us. Looks like there's 6 of us. Perfect. I'm going to break us into pairs of 2. Have you guys look at this exercise I'm about to flash, and then think about these 4 gap types. And then what I'll do is we'll come back after about 3 minutes or about 5 minutes of you guys evaluating the examples, and then we'll talk about which one of those examples falls into which one of these four gap types. So what we'll do is this, if you don't mind, I'll have you 2 right here, then you 2 right here, and then you 2 behind. Just get into pairs. Again, keep in mind these 4 types of gaps. And then we'll look at 4 different examples that's going on with our favorite company, Meridian SG. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to just discuss these 4 examples and then be able to identify which one of those 4 control types each one of the examples falls into. And again, just in case, the 4 of them are right here for you, just as reference.
I think how insufficient because they are doing it, but they haven't installed it. Because I do like WordPress, after I do my website, I will do one restore backups. At least I know that plugin works. Regardless of HP, at least you know that there's a restore. Yes. Otherwise, it's back up to a pocket. That's sufficient.
No, way is compensated.
Yes, collectively it's efficient.
Is absent.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Most efficient.
Insufficient. These insufficient. Okay. Legacy VPN cannot accept it.
They need
So,
to at least
that has
I
not
haven't
happened.
known my previous company. So, my IT guy was just there, and I asked him why he wasn't checking.
Insufficient
It was this
insufficient also.
and my boss wasn't willing to pay anything.
Based on our understanding.
So she without but thinking that it's what I do.
No, these concepts, these insufficient, these insufficient or
That's the only answer. And I think it's very important, especially for basic things. My friend he does a lot of online training via when I set up him, I realized he wasn't doing any professional application because he's lazy to try to do it. But even for his own money's sake, he said it's with bosses, whatever, let's say, like I've seen VPNs and also applications in my former clients and my former bosses. is I always thought that the setup, I find that the Asian company, they always tell you how you order. Auditing is too troublesome. And I always thought him right now, we would install the authenticator on. I let this authenticator, then I taught him to monitor at least for building and trust and all the authenticator on to show that the user is doing this to other people. Although once you read through the authenticator on another 40 like something, all machines have a backup. So that would be trusted. And even that, I see they do it sometimes.
All right. Welcome. We were in the middle of a mini exercise, so I'll try to bring you up to speed later. But basically, what we're doing, what the class is doing is I put them into groups, and I had them discuss these 4 different scenarios that's going on with this fictitious company called Meridian SG. For them to look at each one of these gaps and try to determine what type of gap it is. It could either be one of these 4, and I know you just got here, so you don't have the context, but so just we'll bring you up to speed though. For the rest of the class, this first one, Meridian SG runs nightly backup successfully. There's never been a documented restore test. Which one of these gap types do you guys believe it is?
Compensated.
You think it's compensated? Why would you, and what is your reasoning for believing that is a compensating
Because there are
control?
2 legs. They are doing the backup successfully.
Mhm.
It's one leg of the, from my understanding, basically.
Okay.
But they have now been documented. So if there is no document, we cannot fall back on the trial. What is the audit trial that has happened or something like that.
Okay.
So in that sense, I put it as like a compensated approach as far as A is concerned.
Okay. All right. Do
That
we?
is my logic.
Okay. Do we have any other answers? Sure.
Insufficient.
Insufficient. Why do you think it's insufficient?
Because they did the backup, but there is no log to see whether it's already been documented or not.
Okay. No evidence. No evidence to prove it actually works. Okay. How about you?
Actually, we also believe insufficient. We also chose insufficient.
Okay.
My experience having done WordPress setups for my clients is I always do one documented test for them
Okay.
to show that there's a backup, and then I remind them that they must do periodical backups. At least there is a proof of concept or proof that my backup works.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent.
I think it's deficient.
You think it's deficient? Why do you think it's deficient? Okay.
It does come,
Okay. All right.
but you want to restore it, you can't. But you can say,
Okay.
so you don't test it. No testing.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, the correct answer is insufficient, and the reason why is because you just don't know if it works. You know you're doing it. It's there. It's on paper, but you have no idea if it works. So that would fall under insufficient if we were to go back here, right? The control may exist, but we cannot verify that it actually works. So we have no idea if it actually. How about B? Meridian's finance mailbox has DMARC published. And again, it's a little technical. Don't worry about the technical aspects of it, but it's not blocking. So there's something in place, but it's only alerting. It's not actually preventing the risk from happening. Which control type would you put it in?
Deficient.
Okay, because
Because your screen, the earlier screen says the example, DMARC is set at P.
all right, fair enough. Anybody else?
Probably it's like the policy is set, but it can still be penetrated. I mean, it's not fully blocked.
Mm-hmm.
It shows that something's coming, but there's no resist in it. So it's like the program will still enter to the, like what they say is not blocking.
So you would also say it's deficient as well?
Yes.
Okay. Any other answers?
Yeah, efficient. Because
Okay.
T equals to minus is set to either priority knowledge.
Very good, very good. That is correct. At the end of the day, the control is there, but it's only kind of helping. It's not fully protected. So there is some deficiency there. Example 3, Meridian SG has no data loss prevention coverage on its business intelligence exporting tooling. Customer data can be exported with no monitoring. Which control type gap is that one?
Absent.
Absent. Why you say that?
Refer to the previous screen.
There's nothing previous screen. How about everybody else? Same? You guys agree? Absent, or do you guys have a different answer?
Absent because there is no DLT in place.
Exactly. Exactly. That's it. This one, if there's nothing there, then it's very clear it's absent. You literally have nothing. Okay? So that leaves us D. Meridian's SG legacy VPN cannot accept MFA. Therefore, privileged users must access via a hardened jump host with stricter monitoring. Which control type would that be?
Maybe deficient or inefficient.
Okay. Could be deficient or inefficient. Okay.
On a layman's term.
Anyone else?
Compensate.
Compensating. Why would you say compensating?
Because like what, yeah, the previous slide, right? We also put there like it's an old system, the legacy system, so cannot configure an MFA, so we have to do another method of compensate what it cannot.
Okay. Anybody else? Compensating. It's compensating. At the end of the day, you know the control you want to put in place, but it breaks the system. So you can't put it in place. Okay? Doesn't matter if it's protecting against hackers if it don't work. Right? Now that's a business problem. That's an operational problem. So you have to navigate that tension to say, okay, I have a legitimate threat that's a risk to the business, and I know the control that's supposed to protect because it was built to protect that particular threat, but due to the legacy or due to the nature of the technology, if I put that control in place, it will break the system. Therefore, what can I put in place to still protect but keep the system up and running? And that's what a compensating control does. It says, okay, it's not the direct control to fixing the risk, but it's another way to approach it. And here's the thing with compensating controls. A lot of times, they can be even more complicated than the direct control you're trying to put into place, because it may be a chain of measures you have to put together, right? So it ends up even being more secure than the direct control you would have put in place, which means more overhead, administrative overhead, right? Possibly even more head count, whatever the case may be. So sometimes a compensating control can be more painful than the actual control itself. But you have no choice because you can't afford, you're a banking system, you're running Windows 7, right? You just can't rip out a million Windows 7s in your ATMs or whatever the case may be. You just can't do it. You're running a mainframe, right? You can't put MFA on some of these credentials because it won't allow you to log in. It just doesn't support multi-factor authentication or whatever the case may be. And so you then have to look at other ways to protect against that particular risk.
Isn't banking mostly running on COBOL-based programs? And
That too, that's a big part of it as well.
Heavy, big assets.
It's a very heavy. It's very heavy. But I would tell you this: financial institutions, by and large, are the most secure organizations on the planet because they have to be. Okay? Just like I would argue, from an operating system perspective, Microsoft Windows is the most secure operating system because it has to be. They roll out security updates every month. Sometimes they release security updates out of band multiple times within the month because they have no choice. Their attack surface is so big, they have to be more secure. These financial institutions know they're running outdated technology that there's no security patches for it. There's like literally all they have is controls to try to protect those assets because they can't patch the assets themselves. And they can't rip the assets out because it would cost too much.
I know what is VPN, but MFA stands for what? Authentication is
MFA,
yeah.
right here, multi-factor authentication.
Multi-factor authentication.
Yes, yes. Multi-factor authentication is when, okay, you already, okay, perfect. All right. Okay, excellent. So now we're going to move on to my favorite aspect of cybersecurity. Okay, this is a little more advanced, so I apologize in advance, but it is so important. And this is where the cybersecurity community has to pivot their lens. They have to start seeing cyber differently because this right here is what's going to take their security program exponentially higher up as far as cyber assurance goes. Okay, and it's called threat-informed defense, which if you think about it, what are you defending? Why are you even defending? You're defending because there's a threat, right? You put protection in place to protect against some type of threat. That's why we have locks. You know, unfortunately, where I come from, it's why we have guns. The idea is you protect yourself. It's all for protecting yourself because there's someone or something that's attacking you. In security, for some strange reason, we build our security programs without even knowing our threats. We build our security programs on some framework. We build our security programs on buzzwords. We build our security programs on what our friends say we should have, or what our colleagues say we should have, or what the board says we should have, who's not cybersecurity professionals. We build it on everything but on the foundation of what are we building it for? And it's to protect against specific threats targeting us. So it ends up being a generic security program and reactive. And then what ends up happening is you have breaches. But I'm compliant. I'm MAS TRM compliant, which we'll talk about in a little bit, right? Monetary Authority of Singapore Technical Risk Management. I'm MAS TRM compliant. This company, right? Meridian SG has to be MAS TRM compliant to be a financial institution in Singapore. It is a regulatory government mandate. I'm compliant. How did I get breached? Just because you're compliant doesn't mean you're protected, because you didn't build your program against the threats. Your threats aren't following MAS TRM's guidelines saying, okay, well, this is what MAS TRM says we should be protecting, we should have in place, so this is how I'm going to attack Meridian SG. No. They know exactly what your security program is built like, and what they're doing is they're trying to find a way into your environment that benefits them. So threat-informed defense basically says we are going to, number one, start with understanding what is our threat profile. What is the threat profile? Threat profile is who out there is targeting companies in Singapore in financial services that has 280 employees, or 50 to 250, 50 to 500 employees, right? That has this type of technology. Who is that? Okay, once we have that list, how are they going to attack us? Once we have those two pieces of information, now we can go back to our security program and say, how does our security program protect against this? Right? That starts with cyber threat intelligence. Then you take that cyber threat intelligence and you map it against your key assets. And then you map it to your security controls. Right? And this is how you know for sure, what do I have that will protect me against the actual threat actors that are targeting me. And then the last step is, that's not good enough, because again, that's on paper. You need to validate. Just like we were talking about the controls need to be validated, just in general, when you're doing a gap assessment. Not even thinking about, adversaries or threat actors, not even thinking about the threat aspect of it, just thinking about these are, the controls that we've identified that there may be gaps. We need to validate to make sure they're good, right? This takes it a step further and says, okay, now we need to do all that from a threat perspective. So a gap register without a threat-informed lens lists what's missing, right? With the lens, it lists which adversary behaviors you're failing to frustrate. The first one's academic, it's traditional. The second one This is what's really going to protect you at the end of the day. Okay, so now, everything we've been talking about regarding the gaps, the gap types, talking about threat-informed defense. Now what it's about is it's about taking all that and translating into what does that mean for the business? What's the impact? What's the risk exposure, right? This is what boards care about. This is what they care about. How much money is it going to cost us, right? What type of penalty, what type of regulatory considerations are there? What does this mean over here, operationally? You were talking about ransomware. Ransomware can take you down. Not only can they steal your data, but they can actually impact your ability to operate. Companies like Jaguar were down for weeks. They lost billions, right? Land Rover had to be, potentially bailed out by the government because it got so bad because they literally just couldn't bring their systems back up because they hadn't gotten the threats out of their system. So they just couldn't afford to bring the systems back up. This is a huge OT, operational technology, which healthcare systems use, manufacturing use, critical infrastructure, critical information infrastructure here in Singapore and in other countries. The one thing they can't afford to be is down. You steal my data, that sucks. Brand reputation, that sucks. But if I'm down, I'm dead in the water, I go out of business. I might be able to recover from the fines and the brand reputation damage and all these other things, but if I'm not operating, I'm dead in the water. So when you're able to now start to take those gaps and attach them to the operational side, to the financial side, to the regulatory side, to the reputational side, that's when you start to prioritize which gaps in my gap register we need to work on first. Okay? This is ordinal. This is not quantitative. Each one of these has its own score, has its own level of importance. But one of the things I want to touch on, right? Impact can tell you how bad it can be. Threat-informed analysis can tell you how likely it is because who's targeting you. Together, they produce a risk exposure. But this is just an example. When you go back to your business, you need to be thinking about how is this contextualized to my environment, right? Number one, and then number two, right? How can I translate this to the board so they understand? And we'll talk about that more in phase 3 when we talk about, measuring and evaluating how you go about mitigating these controls gaps. Okay, so gap register snapshot, right? We've got our serial number, we got the risk or the threat, we got the control that's required, we got the current control that is or is not in place, we got the type of gap it is, right, which we talked about during the activity. And then now we're talking about what's the impact. So this is how you now start to decide which one is most important. Naturally, critical is going to be the most important. That's where you're going to put your focus on the most, right? The thing is, and I just want to touch on this real quick, initially when it comes to the actual gap being absent, the actual risk that comes with it from a threat actor perspective, sometimes that can be trumped by the compliance implications. And this is what we call a compliance constraint. What I think should be number one, because I know threat actors are actively targeting it right now, there may be there may be another gap that's, maybe here, it's still critical, but, like this one's absent. This one technically should be right here, right? But maybe this insufficient one from a compliance perspective pushes this up. It may be even past absent. We call that a compliance constraint. We don't agree with it, but we understand from a compliance perspective it needs to take a priority. And that's one of the objectives we talk about is compliance and governance constraints. We call it politics, you can call it bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes what is most important may not be the most important gap you work on. Yes.
Some gaps can be critical, some gaps can be major, and some can be negligible.
Correct.
Is that the understanding?
Yes. You know, again, when it comes to,
As deficient is critical, again deficient is major.
yes,
So there is no indexing. If it is deficient, it has to be critical. If it is absent,
correct. Because it takes more than just the gap type, right? It also talks about your risk and your threat. And it also talks about the compliance.
so the index is based on the risk of the threat. Then comes the gap type. Then comes the impact.
Or it could also be compliance in there as well. All of those are a part of the calculation.
So compliance gap is always a critical impact.
No, it depends. It depends. But you have to look at all those to determine at the end of the day, all those factors determine which one determines my prioritization. Right? I can have 5 criticals, but maybe compliance says this one needs to be more important. Or the impact says this one is more important. Right? Or the fact that I literally have nothing there says this was more important. Right? All those things you have to factor in as you're putting together your prioritization. It's not just like one
So
thing.
there is no one single tablet saying that if it is critical, then definitely.
No.
No.
So that's why this gap register is so important, is because you have to take all these things and factor them in, and you come up with this, and then you have to go and justify it to the board. Right? That's your job. That's your job. Now with AI is starting to automate a lot of these things. But again, these are processes, right? And for the most part, you still need people who are knowledgeable, have the expertise, the skill set to put this together, because they have to defend it to the board. Because at the end of the day, if the board signs off on it, they're expecting that to protect the business. So if that's wrong, you got your prioritization wrong, and the company gets breached, that comes back on you. This is the stuff CISOs have to deal with, right? This is the stuff that security program owners have to deal with. Like it's heavy. It's a heavy responsibility. All right, how are we doing on time? Okay, so I'm gonna fly through this quickly, right? All I wanna do is I'm gonna give you a couple examples of security frameworks. Okay, these are security frameworks. Has everybody heard of ISO 27001?
No.
Okay. Have you heard of NIST CSF? Have you heard of MAS TRM? Okay, perfect. This obviously is the most important one for Singapore. The reason why I put this on here is it's 3 different use cases, 3 different scenarios. Okay? This is used for how to build a proper global security program. This is more formal. This is what a structure looks like. This is how you build it. Companies like this, your clients like this. When you're trying to get new clients, they want to know how secure you are. They want to find out if you're ISO 27001 certified. It's a global standard for how you build your security program. This is not a requirement, but it is a certification you can get to prove to your clients or your prospective clients, hey, I'm taking care of business. This right here, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, it's a US-based organization. They have something called the Cybersecurity Framework. This is specifically for how, if you don't have anything, you don't have a regulatory standard you have to follow, you're not going after ISO 27001, but you want a good like baseline to build your security program, this is good. Right? It teaches you governance, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Very similar to NIST CSF is CEM, Cyber Essentials Mark here in Singapore. They have a Cyber Essentials Mark, they have a Cyber Trust Mark. It's part of their Cyber Safe initiative here in Singapore. Very similar, right? But unlike NIST, CEM you can get certified. CTM you can get certified, right? But the concept's very similar. This is a proper way of how to protect yourself from a cybersecurity perspective. And then this is regulatory compliance frameworks, MAS TRM, PDPA, right? These are mandates here in Singapore. In a lot of countries, you have to have certain security in place just to be compliant with the government, or else the government will come after you. So it's 3 different use cases. This is nice for customers. This is nice for making sure you build a framework, you build some baseline, and this is mandatory. So a lot of companies, not here in Singapore, but a lot of companies, well, actually, we'll say here in Singapore, there's a lot of companies that they have to follow the PDPA framework or standard, but they don't have to be MAS TRM certified because they're not in a financial institution, right? Obviously, they don't need this because they're not in the U.S. This is a nice baseline, and they don't have any customers that say, I want to see you be ISO 27001 certified. So for those, that's where those companies would probably fall in here, right? But these are 3 different types of frameworks, and the key here is, in a lot of cases, they work together. You start with CEM, right, or NIST. Then, right, or say you start with MAS TRM because you're a financial institution. On top of this framework, then maybe you layered on with some stuff from CTM, from Cyber Trust Mark. Then you label it on with ISO 27001. So they also complement each other. They're not in competition. There's a lot of companies that can have like 5 or 6 security frameworks because they want to make sure that they are able to identify gaps in their environment. And sometimes, and that's what you use these frameworks for. That's the point of these frameworks is not only do they help you build better security programs, but they help you surface where there's actual gaps in your existing security programs.
So what is the ultimate test to say that, yeah, we are having all these in place? Is there any global certification like the CSF, NIST CSF?
No.
Is there any certificate saying that everything under umbrella is covered?
No. What you do have though is you can show them evidence, like I have an ISO 27001 certification. This is my MAS TRM compliance. This is my PDPA compliance. So you can show them evidence, but there's not like some universal certificate you can show that says I cover all of these. But what you can do is you can buy what's called a GRC tool, and you can put all these frameworks in your tool and manage these processes through the GRC tool, and then it will create what's called a trust page that you can print out and give to whoever to show that, hey, I'm compliant here, I'm compliant here, I'm compliant there. Right? But there's no official certification. But that still would be some type of visibility that you could give to whoever to show them, your board, an auditor, future clients, existing clients.
In Qatar, in CMM module, where does this one fall? ISO 27001 or the NCST cyber security?
Yes. So
In
NIST.
the model where it falls, level 1 or level 5 or which level?
So the NIST CSF framework would be a combination of both CEM and certain levels in CTM. Okay? But it doesn't cover both.
It doesn't cover.
No. Now there's another framework by NIST called Special Publication 800-53. That one, which is very comprehensive, it was meant for government agencies. That one would map nicely or map more closely to like all the levels of CTM. Yeah. So, which is why I love Singapore, because they look at these other frameworks and they use them to build their own standards. So they actually map nicely.
Based on my experience, all the financial institutions in Singapore, in what level of CMM they are in, just as you are based on your experience, because all financial institutions say
Right.
that we are the best,
Right.
DBS every time show security like that.
Right.
But they come up with novel applications. Then suddenly there will be a patchwork. The services is not be available, so on and so forth.
Right.
So based on your experience, what is the CMM level of these companies?
It depends on the company, right? So for instance, being a financial institution company, you have to comply to MAS TRM. Okay? That is based on Monetary Authority of Singapore. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be CTM certified, which comes from CSA, the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. So it's different agencies, different frameworks, different requirements. So it really just depends. If I'm a critical information infrastructure owner here in Singapore, I have to be, based off this year, CSA Singapore has now released new requirements that says I have to be Cyber Trust Mark Tier 5, Level 5 certified by the end of December 2027, right? That is the highest tier. I have to have that, right? If I'm also, as being a CII owner, in the financial institution, then I gotta have both. I gotta be MAS TRM compliant and I have to be CTM level 5 compliant. So it depends on scenarios, right? I wouldn't compare the two because they're for different reasons, right?
Understood.
Yes, CTM is meant more for holistically everybody, but primarily for critical infrastructure, just like NIST 853 was meant more for government agencies, but it's good to adopt. Just like if you're a non-financial institution, it's still good to adopt MAS TRM because there's great stuff in there from a security perspective, even though it may not be applicable to you because you're in e-commerce or you're a healthcare provider, something along those lines. Okay, I'm behind schedule a little bit, so I just want to quickly point out that, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes your prioritizing of your gap controls may be influenced by the compliance, by the regulatory, right? So this one already was number 1 on the list before, but say this was like number 3. Well, MAS TRM has certain expectations, so because of that, that 3 may end up becoming a 2 or maybe end up becoming a 1. That's back to that compliance constraints I was talking about. Because here's the thing. Every gap control you should be able to map it back to your framework, right? And that again, that goes into prioritizing. If you get audited, you have to be able to show why you're not MAS TRM compliant because of these 3 gaps that are missing. Now all of a sudden those become prioritized because MAS is threatening to fine you, right? That might be more relevant than you being breached, right? Maybe the threat actor doesn't get to you. It's a numbers game. Maybe the threat actor doesn't get to you for another 2 or 3 months. They're running through the numbers. But MAS TRM says you're going to be fined next week if you don't jump on this. So now all of a sudden, this becomes more of a priority than maybe that absent control from a risk and threat perspective. All right. Woo! We are 6 minutes, 7 minutes behind, but phase 1 walkaway, right? Every gap has 5 fields. Again, that's the gap. That's the gap assessment. Current state, future state, gap type, business impact, action direction. There's four different gap types we talked about: absent, deficient, compensating, and insufficient. Threat informed helps to change what's missing into what adversary behavior are we failing to frustrate. Frameworks are lenses, not destinations. This is very important, right? They help you to look at your gaps and surface certain gaps, but it shouldn't be your end game. I need to be MAS TRM certified. Yes, you do, but that shouldn't be the end game. The end game should be, how do I continue to improve my security program by mapping it to MAS TRM and making sure all the controls are there. And then last but not least, business impact is ordinal, right? This is what the government, this is what your board cares about. Okay, they don't, and I'll talk about this later, but they don't care how many patches, vulnerabilities you did this month, right? They don't want to hear that. We'll talk about that in phase 3, right? But this is business language right here. And this is what most CISOs are having to learn. Stop being so technical and start being more talking from an operational and enterprise level of what does that mean? Whatever you're doing, cyber guy, what does that mean for the business? Numbers are great, right? Risk reduction is great. Because to them, risk reduction means better numbers, right? All right. With that said, we will take a 10-minute break, and we'll jump into phase 2. All right.
Actually, this one was interesting that you said Windows is the most difficult, but it's also the most scary one. Like, for example, Windows 10, they stopped supporting it.
Yep.
So no more security updates, no more any of that stuff.
Exactly.
But for industries like banking,
Yep.
for industries like travel,
Mm-hmm.
we have certain applications in travel that
Right.
are tied to certain OSs. And
Yep.
at one point, actually, our airline services, right, there are multiple variants.
Yep.
Our boss would invest $200,000 on one variant, and then it gets updated, but she doesn't want to spend $200 upgrading it again. But then that is tied to, like, say, Windows 7, and it's like susceptible to DDoS attack.
Exactly.
But so she'll be asking me, why should I spend $1,000? Because you don't want to be treated later and get a $1 million fine.
There you go, right? When you start to quantify it, then that's when you can start to, they'll start to look at things differently. But if you just say, oh, because it's obsolete and, you know, it's a security threat, like, they'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I had to scare her with a fine.
There you go. You know, that is talking board language. That's what they understand, right? That's what they understand. And so, but at the same time, a lot of these companies, they'll work with you. In other words, for instance, like with the travel agency, with the travel industry, and with banking and so forth, even though Windows 7 and Windows 10 is obsolete, you can still go behind the doors and cut deals with Microsoft to continue to support it for a premium, right? But that premium still ends up being less than you to rip out all your Windows 7 and Windows 10 machines and upgrade them to Windows 11. And so that is where sometimes there's a third option that, hey, right, there's a reason why we're still running on COBOL, because IBM still supports COBOL and all these other things, right? But it's like a special behind the scenes premium that's not available to everybody, right? So most people are going to upgrade to Windows 11, but those who can't afford to upgrade to Windows 11 because it's just too expensive, say it costs $1 billion to upgrade. Well, if I pay, you know, 10 million a year for the next 20 years to Microsoft and slowly upgrade, then in the grand scheme of things, that's going to be less than that $1 billion I had to pay. Not only that, but then, you know, what kind of downtime am I looking like? Oh my goodness, now I'm losing money. Not only does it cost me to upgrade, but now I'm losing money because I'm down, right? These ATMs are down, people are complaining, they can't do this, they can't do that, right? So that goes back to the availability piece where it's like, I can't afford.
Yeah, I will argue that's the case with banking financial institutions.
Yep.
Because they can't afford the downtime, and for them to migrate from COBOL to a newer language, there's also a data migration. There's that big fear of losing their data where they have to be compliant, and yet they also have to answer to all those banking customers.
Right.
That's a living nightmare. And no board member is going to be willing to put his ass on the line and sign off on that.
No, you're right. No, you're right. You're right.
That's why COBOL programmers, they charge a fee. But they're dying.
They do. They are dying, but they do cause a premium. I'll be right back. Hey. So. Okay.
Yeah, it's alright, no issue.
So.
Screen.
Okay. But you didn't need that. You don't necessarily need the audio. Okay. Should I put myself back on mute then? Okay. I'll put it back on mute then. Okay. You taking off?
Yeah, go on.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming. Yes. Were you guys okay with the first phase? Was it? I know it's quite heavy, but were you guys able to track? Make some sense? There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of advanced principles in here. Threat informed defense. I talk to large enterprises, security leaders. They don't know what that is. I educate them on that. There's cybersecurity companies that are offering tools. They don't know what threat informed defense is. So it's quite a complicated concept. So, but it's important. It is extremely important. If you can at least kind of understand it, it's very important in the way you go about approaching protecting yourself and your companies and so forth. This next phase is going to be a little heavier. So, yeah, just conceptually, it's going to be a lot of concepts thrown at you. That's it. It's going to be a lot of concepts thrown at you because now we're going to start talking about the security program. So just preparing you guys. But you're still with us. I only lost one, so that's good. That's good. That's a good sign. All right. Well, we will jump right into phase 2. Design program improvement. Based off of everything you did in phase 1, now you're going to put it back on your security program and look at areas of opportunity to improve your security program. If you don't have a security program, then obviously you would use phase 1 to help you build your security program. But in this workshop, we'll be talking about you already have an existing, we'll be using the context that you already have an existing program, so you're looking to improve it. All right. Actually, before I jump into it, let me go back. Who here can explain to me what a security program is?
Maybe a firewall is an example of a security program as far as on a layman's thing.
Okay.
There is a firewall which is happening around. That can be a security.
Okay.
Security means no matter whatever happens, there are certain steps involved which will protect from a major damage,
Right.
not a minor damage. That's my overall understanding.
Okay. All right.
A simple example is like a two-factor authentication.
Yep.
Because one-factor authentication can be misleading, so
Right.
you just do your two-factor authentication. It's one simple example to my understanding.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'll take a shot at it. More than just firewalls, like our friend here has mentioned.
Yes.
There's a number of processes that we put in place around the entire company's operations to see where are the possible gaps within the interactions, how the data is entered and where they are solved, and that's where the firewalls and all that come in.
Yep.
See where the vulnerabilities are.
Yep.
And like we mentioned just now, whether the old operating system is still updated.
Exactly. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So yeah, both good answers, and we'll get into it in the next slide. But what it is not a bunch of projects. Okay. This is something that lives in your environment, and it's something you have to operationalize every single second. That's why we're improving it, because part of operationalizing it is improving it. It's not just keeping it as it is in this static state, steady state, if you want to call it that, and just doing it over and over and over. No, you need to be able to measure it, you need to be able to maximize it, you need to be able to mature it. So it is a progression, and part of that progression is being able to improve it. So when the board asks you, what are we actually doing about cyber risk, why, and how will we know it's working? Well, you don't know unless you've been able to operationalize it, surface the gaps, identify the gaps, validate the other controls that are in place that they are working. You can't answer this question unless you've been able to do those things. And so that's where, that's the important aspect of of a security program. People, process, technology. That's a simple way of telling people what a security program is. The firewalls are part of the technology, the processes, the things you're doing are part of the processes, but you still need people. AI can't replace the people aspect of a security program. You still need an owner. Okay? There's two senses of a security program. For this workshop, we're only going to be talking about the security program improvement aspect of it. But then you have your standard security program, which is what I asked you guys, what is that, right? So a lot of times what ends up happening is, you know, when we talk about something, we mean this over here, but maybe it's misconstrued and they think we mean this over there. So I just want to be very clear. In the 2-day workshop, in the 2-day training course that we'll be doing, we'll be talking about both of these. But for this workshop, we're only going to be talking about improvement, right? And that is a bounded set of initiatives delivered to, you know, to specific outcomes. Basically, those initiatives are the gaps you identified, the control gaps you identified. You're going to transform them through this phase into actual initiatives. All right? So again, we teach about improving it, but, you know, the security program itself is the subject of the full 2-day course that we'll be doing as well here at Equinet. Within the security program improvement, there's 6 elements. So when you're improving your security program by identifying those gaps in your gap assessment that are now in your gap register and saying, okay, to prioritize, we need to fix these, okay? The way you translate that has to go through these elements, right? Again, you've already identified, so you've already done the first one, okay? You've done the second one. Do we actually have an owner though? We didn't talk about ownership. You need to make sure there's an owner attached to that particular gap, control gap, right? Who are the resources that owner is going to use to work that gap, that control gap? What's the target completion date, right? Do you have milestones? You know, is it something you can get done in the next week? Is it something that's going to take 6 months? If so, what's your milestone look like? Your milestones look like? And ultimately, what's the status, right? You got to be reporting this to the board, especially if these are, you know, these initiatives are quite expensive in nature, like upgrading thousands of operating systems or implementing multi-factor authentication across hundreds of privileged users, whatever the case may be, there's going to be a cost to it, whether it be downtime. So you'll need to be able to explain all this as you're working to remediate these gaps and improve your security program. So all of the frameworks, by the way, they use different terminology, just like with the control type, the control gap types. I was saying that there's different nomenclature. The concept's the same. Okay, MAS TRM, CTM, CSA, CTM, and other global standards, they all have expectations that your security program is constantly being improved. It's actually part of that, right? So they expect you to be doing these things. They expect you to be taking a gap and converting it to an initiative, right? If it can't be evaluated, it can't be an initiative. So we're going to talk about this in a minute, but your initiative, implement MFA. That's not an initiative, right? Because you didn't funnel it through the 6 elements, but then on top of that, you're not funneling it through the SMART methodology. This is another term in governance, risk, and compliance, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. Maps very well with those 6 elements. But each one of your initiatives needs to go through a SMART methodology, right? So one of the things we had in our gap register was there was an issue with MFA, right? The control required is we need a more phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication for privileged accounts. The current control is a one-time password that's being sent out, Could be sent out via SMS, could be sent out via email, okay? Those aren't phishing resistant. Those can be captured by threat actors, right? But what threat actors can't do, and I won't get into it, but they can't break FIDO resistant multi-factor authentication because of the way that MFA technology is built, right? FIDO 2 rollouts. Have you guys heard of passkeys? Okay, passkeys are FIDO 2 compliant. That is the MFA technology that phishing, that threat actors cannot break. At least today they cannot break it, right? Because it actually uses keys. It actually uses asymmetric key cryptography and so forth. There's a lot of things involved there that it makes it difficult to capture that, right? That's why most companies are being encouraged, and most government agencies are being encouraged to, if you don't have MFA, make sure you move towards FIDO 2 compliant MFA or passkeys. If you do have MFA, it's time to upgrade. Again, we can't stay static in our security program. We need to constantly be looking at our controls and seeing how can they be better, right? Oh, we have a gap now. MFA can be compromised. Okay, we need a better version of MFA. Now, for you to take this and turn it into an initiative, again, right, needs to be smart. So you can't just say we need to implement FIDO MFA. No, you need to be very specific, right? We need to achieve phishing resistant MFA on 100% of our privileged and remote access accounts by this time frame, with quarterly attestation to the Board Risk Committee and to MAS TRM for Section 9 to prove that we're compliant to that. We'll have evidence that's available on demand. That's a very specific, detailed initiative. Okay? And again, every one of these frameworks expects you to be doing this. They have their different ways of explaining it, but they all recognize SMART methodology. Okay. Back to risk-based prioritization, right? We were talking about this a little bit in phase 1. Risk-based prioritization can be based off of threats and risks. It can be based off of compliance. It can be based off of control gap types, right? But also, aspect of it is, like, what's the effort? We didn't even talk about the effort, right? What's the feasibility? We're going to get into it a little bit later, but we're going to talk about residual gaps. We just couldn't get to it. We wanted to fix it. We had this time frame. We weren't able to do it. Right? Now that becomes a residual gap, right? So what's the important things here is, again, I want everybody to understand that it starts with the adversary behavior. Why are you building your security program? Once you understand that, right, what's the impact? What's the real world risk to your business? Then what's the regulatory exposure? Finally, what is the practical constraints to you actually doing it? There's a lot of businesses that still run mainframes because they don't want to pay to upgrade. There's a lot of travel agencies that are still running outdated versions of Windows because they don't want to pay to upgrade. And they've been able to work out a deal with these vendors behind closed doors for a premium to pay for support. That's still extremely expensive, but not as expensive of ripping and replacing or going through the upgrade, going through the transformation process. So now what I want to do is I want to talk about those initiatives. What does a structured initiative look like, which we just looked at, versus what does an informal initiative look like, right? Now, we're going to do it through the 6 elements that we talked about, right? There's 6 elements. Yes, there's a SMART methodology, but the security program improvement has 6 elements. So when you look at each one, this is a finding. We have a gap around phishing. Okay, we have what would be considered informal. Then we have what we could say is structured. So as you're walking through your gaps, through the 6 levels, the 6 elements of the security program improvement, you want to make sure that it's properly structured. So, severity, it's important. That tells the board nothing. Versus, it's a critical, right? This is the threats that are targeting it. And they're highly effective with doing supply chain attacks because of stealing credentials. We're in the crosshairs right now, right? Because they're targeting companies like ours doing this here in Singapore, in our industry. That's a lot different than it's important. Okay. So once you're taking your initiatives, right, and you're looking at it through the compliance, and you're saying, okay, we understand from a threat perspective what it looks like, but now, once again, what does the initiative look like from a compliance perspective? How can I map it back to that particular framework that I'm following? If I need to be PDPA compliant, which section of the PDPA do I need to be compliant to? Can I map it back to that initiative? This is also showing quantitative outcomes or quantitative information back to your board. Okay, we are specifically non-compliant in PDPA Section 24. We're non-compliant in MAS TRM Section 9. We're non-compliant in ISO 27001 Control 5.15 and Control 8.5. By the way, board, we have all 3 frameworks because we're required to have them. We're mandated by Singapore, the first 2, and our customers are mandating us to be ISO 27001 compliant. So we have to hold all these frameworks. So therefore, everything we do has to be filtered through these particular frameworks. Or maybe we have 4 or 5 or 6. Maybe we're CTM level 4 certified because that looks good as well, right? It's not necessarily a mandate by the government, but it looks good for us to show that not only are we ISO 27001 compliant, but we're also CTM level 4 compliant. Okay, well, what are the controls that are required there? How do we map those to those controls? The more frameworks you have, the more mapping you have to do with each one of your initiatives. Not only do you have to map your gaps to be able to show, the prioritization, but then as you're actually going to do implementation, right, you got to map them as well. And it should align. At the end of the day, how you prioritize your gaps should be the same when it comes to building your initiatives.
CTM stands for capability.
Cyber Trust Mark.
Cyber trust.
Yes. Which, to your point, is a framework and a capable maturity model.
Capability.
That's right. That's what the beauty about CTM is. Not only can you get certified in it, but it's actually a maturity model. So you can start level 1 and then work your way towards level 5 as you grow as a company, which shows, again, your board, shows the regulators, show auditors, show future clients that you're growing in your security program. You're not staying at level 1. You haven't stayed at level 1 for the last 5 years.
Because many IT companies are not even CMM level 2 or level 3.
True.
But they do provide a lot of services to FAs and financial companies and other verticals. When you look into that structure,
Yes.
they themselves is not in CMO model. How the hell they can go and do such things? Really crazy one.
Correct.
Really
Yeah, no,
crazy.
you're right. You're right.
Because it's a very big ticket item as we speak now.
Correct.
It is the big ticket item from the year 2024 end. Full of 2025, there was a big
Correct.
hoo-ha about all these
Yes.
things. But all the companies go and serve the ultimate clients,
Right.
not even have CMM level 2. I personally know certain companies.
Yes.
Then I was thinking, how come this guy go and talk to that guy? I can solve your problem. Really
Well,
don't know.
And to your point, it's because they don't have to be.
They don't
It's,
have
it's,
it.
it's, it's good, right? This is the challenge that we deal with in security. It's like you have to be forced. But we need to get away from being forced to taking the initiative. We need to get away from being reactive to being proactive,
Many
right?
companies don't do that. sir.
Correct. Correct. And then when they get compromised or they get fined, then they do it, right? But it shouldn't get to that.
because I know 3 companies as we speak now, they have everything but don't have the PDPA compliance. I
Yep.
asked them one simple question, are you PDPA compliant in the first place? That one, we will talk with your top man. I asked the top management just one simple question. Okay, you have such a big office, blah blah blah, everything.
Right.
But the fundamentals you don't do, then what are you talking about?
Exactly. Exactly. So this is about awareness, but there's going to have to be a paradigm shift where businesses, unfortunately they're being forced now, which helps, but at some point they need to start taking the initiative and doing this on
Because
themselves.
When I speak with PDPA and PDPC, they say we are just only a regulatory body.
Right.
We don't go look into the organization whether they really go through such.
Because they don't have the manpower here.
Because we
Yeah.
don't have the manpower or
Yeah.
we don't have any interest.
Correct.
Because if you know now, there are almost 184,000 companies registered in ACRA.
Right.
Even if you do a simple mathematics, I tell you 90% of the companies don't have PDP.
Yeah.
The OOB stands for what, sir? I know what is DMARC, but OOB meaning what?
Personal Data Protection Act.
What is the extension of the OOB?
The which one?
The DMARC.
Oh, this one right here? Oh, okay. So this has to do with financial institutions, but there's this concept called out-of-band verification.
Out of band.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's the big thing with fintech and some of the things they're doing,
K-
right?
KYC.
All that, right? Exactly. Yep.
The PAT exposure and so on.
Yep. Okay. So real quickly, as you guys are looking at all these initiatives, right? Which one? I mean, it's quite obvious, but which one do you see as the biggest issue?
MFA rule.
What's that?
The first one, MFA rule.
Okay.
Because, you're answering the government, and you can get a big fine.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I would say it is a vendor risk framework because most of the companies are based on vendors for many of them
Mm-hmm.
because many services are outsourced.
Okay.
Based on my limited understanding, basically.
Okay.
Because we can be sure of what we do, but we are not sure how the vendor is doing certain things. So it is our responsibility to do a test on the vendors. The vendor risk framework have to be more highlighted or gaslighted and then take an action. And that too, if you see the ISO, IEC,
Right.
there are 2 sections, Annexure 5.19 and Annexure 5.22. When I see
Okay.
the Annexure number goes up, it's
Okay.
of criticality. Because we see PDPA section 24 only. Whereas when it comes to ISO, IEC, there are 2 annexures, addendum 2. So the higher the addendum numbers, then more critical as a layman understanding.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I think it's an unaddressed topic.
Gap remains. Here's the thing. These are all closed. These are all being closed. Yes, they're important, but you're closing gaps over here. There's nothing going on here. Nothing. Right? So, the killer row is the last one, which your program doesn't address. That becomes a priority. That becomes a priority. Okay. Woo! This one is fun, guys. This one is fun. Who here has had to fill out a security questionnaire?
What's the question?
Who here has had to fill out a security questionnaire?
No.
Okay. Who here has had to manage the process of getting vendors to fill out security questionnaires? Security questionnaires are rough. They're rough. Okay, there's this concept called due diligence when it comes to.
Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. There's this concept called due diligence. Okay, in vendor risk management, in third-party risk management, in supply chain risk management, right? And all the above, there's this thing called due diligence. You as a business have decided to outsource a function, okay? For whatever reason. You don't have the skill set, maybe it's cost effective, whatever the case may be, But what are you doing to ensure they're protected? Because you're going to give them access to your environment. What if they get hacked? How do you know they're protected? What do you even know about them? So you have this concept called security questionnaires that you send out to at least show that you're doing some level of due diligence. I got at least, can you answer these 25 questions? Are you MAS TRM compliant? I'm assuming you are because you're in the financial institution, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. Are you PDPA compliant? I'm going to assume you are because you're in Singapore, but I'm going to ask the question, right? Because you're dealing with personal data. Do you have any other certifications? Are you ISO certified? Are you SOC 2 certified? Are you CTM certified? Okay, that's like one of the first questions that should be asked because that's going to tell me quickly what you've done as far as your security program goes. Do you even have a security program? But then two, we're going to get a little more technical. Okay, that's great you have a security program in place, but now tell me how exactly you do certain things. How are you protecting your network security? How are you protecting your endpoint security? Okay, what kind of MFA are you using? What kind of email security are you using? Right? Do you have a DLP? Do you have proof you've restored your backups and they work? Yes. That's the thing with security questionnaires. You can still say yes, yes, add a little sentence, yeah, because I did blah, blah, blah. It's a security questionnaire. So I'm going to receive it and I'm going to be like, yep, according to them, they're good, right? But there's no evidence. There's no evidence. And so what ends up happening, you have these supply chain attacks because threat actors are starting to realize that these people are filling out security questionnaires. They ain't really doing what they say. They're just doing what they got to do to get the business. And you're doing your job of saying, at least I asked the question. I did my part. I asked the question. I can't prove it. I can't walk into their data center and walk into their environment and look at all their security controls and be like, yep, 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 yep. So we're doing something. Okay, well, unfortunately, you can outsource the function, but you can't outsource the accountability. So when you start thinking that at the end of the day, every one of those third parties you work with, you're accountable if they get breached. Because they're going to ask, what did you do to vet them? How deep did you go? Can you answer data access? Can you answer this question? What data do they have access to in our environment? Can they read it? Can they write it? Can they delete it? Can they modify it? Like what kind of access do they have? Right? What kind of system access do they have? What kind of privilege access do they have? Do they just have inherent privilege? You like their cool AI agent, so you just downloaded it and onboarded it and gave it complete admin access through your Google Workspace account, right? And then they got hacked, and then you're Vercel, and now you got hacked because you just implicitly entrusted them and gave them all this access? What does the integration look like, right? How does their code execute? How do the services execute in your environment? Where exactly is it at, right? No security questionnaire is asking these questions. But these are things that you should be thinking about, especially now. Like I mentioned, right? Remember the threat-informed defense lens? Okay? If I'm an adversary and I'm targeting each one of you, and you're a large enterprise like Meridian SG, I'm not going to attack you directly. That's a waste of time now, right? Remember, we're frustrating the adversary. I'm going to start looking at who you deal with. And I may even go deeper. Who do they deal with? And who do they deal with? Because most likely that inherent trust is completely there. So I go attack this guy way down here. I get access to this guy. And then I get access to this guy. And then I get access to Meridian SG. And Meridian SG didn't even know that it came all the way down from here. So that's why you're going to see more and more supply chain attacks take the news. Whenever you see these huge breaches, most of them are going to be supply chain attacks because that's low-hanging fruit for threat actors. They're realizing this, especially with AI. We just talked about it, right? People just give the AI complete access, right? I'll onboard you as an employee, and I'm going to give you role-based access control. This is all you get for your role. This is it. You get this little thing right here. But you give me an AI agent, I'm giving you access to everything. You get everything. What do you need? You need global admin access? What do you need, AI agent? Have it. You can have it all, right? So why do we treat the AI agent differently than we treat an employee? These are the things that you need to start thinking about when you start talking about vendor risk. Again, cyber risk lens. What is the data access? What is the integration architecture? Oh, we didn't even talk about the regulatory exposure. We didn't even talk about that yet, right? Again, if the vendor fails or is compromised, what does that mean for us, right? For Meridian SG, that means non-compliance for MAS TRM and PDPA. Why do you think that is? Why is Meridian SG non-compliant with 2 standards here in Singapore?
$2 million is the cap of fine.
I mean, that's a huge fine.
For one PDPA offense, even a small paper leak,
Right.
the top is $2 million.
So,
Question us.
so why do you think right now, just based off the information, why do you think Meridian SG is already non-compliant from MAS TRM and PDPA?
You should go back to the previous screen where you showed one task.
You want me to go back? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, the unaddressed
Okay.
obligation, the retention is one portion of PDPA obligation if I'm right.
Sure, sure.
Section 25 of
Okay.
PDPA says retention for 2+ years.
Okay.
Then can discard the information after giving information to the vendor or the person from who took the information. MAS TRM section 8 is also effective on that obligation restriction. And Annexure 5.33 and 5.34 states clearly what is the retention methods. So these are all unaddressed obligations as per this company's concern. So that is a major concern.
Okay. So based off of that gap, what would you think it is? Based off what we talked about so far, what do you think that gap is?
In this 3, is it?
MAS outsourcing arrangement.
Vendor risk. That is what their gap is right now. So that leads us to our next exercise. Everybody group back up again, right? Unfortunately, you joined late. The other person was here, had to leave, so I can work with you a little bit, but you guys work together for 6 minutes, and what I want you to do is I want you to sketch out an outline of the initiative that you're going to put in place to address this. How do we make sure that Meridian SG is now MAS TRM and PDPA compliant by putting together an initiative that addresses the lack of vendor risk management? Now, remember, you can't just write down some one blank thing, vendor risk, we're going to implement vendor risk management. No, you got to put together a vendor risk management that goes through the SMART methodology, right? You guys remember what SMART is?
Yeah, specific, manageable, measurable.
Okay. Okay. Yep. Yep.
And time.
Right. So when you're writing your outline, guys, make sure that you write it from a SMART perspective, right? Make sure we just talked about the cyber risk lens. What are the things that it's going to do? How is it going to address data access, integration architecture, and regulatory exposure, right? And then which compliance frameworks is it applicable to? So I'll give you guys 6 minutes to just...
White piece of paper, please.
Okay, you guys need some paper? Okay. All right. I'll give you some paper. But you guys start collaborating, and let me get you some paper. Yes. Can I get some blank paper? Some of them are asking for paper, so. Thank you. Yes, this should be good now. Thank you.
Regulatory exposure.
Does anybody else need paper? Anybody else?
One.
Okay.
Notes for me, in case we continue.
Okay, yes, you know, you three work together. Perfect. Perfect.
Everybody understand the case.
And then, were you with him? Okay, perfect. You guys need paper? You guys good?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you need a piece of paper as well? Okay. Here you go.
Yeah. Because the vendor program is outsources it totally different.
More than one vendor, right?
Yeah.
Still vendor, I think any vendor,
Yeah.
they are all different.
The current state
Actually, there's something like so it's sort of action or under which
So first one we need to do KYC and KYP. Because for banking, more critical is know your client and get in exchange. Core banking, it's for a financial institution, managing assets of the institution. Compensated.
all action. Because you said no cyber security, no monitoring, no
So all these all action,
I
that is
guess it's all under,
unattended,
but it's contractual obligation.
unattended obligation. So that exists. This one should lead to fines. Paid vendor breaches based on the donor assessment by NIST. That is financial gap basically. Business perspective, operational loss, financial loss, and also reputation data. The company shall have reputation question. Defamatory speech. That is in the defamation. So,
Compromise our reputation, violation.
We call it as one line. Data access is one line. Like critical, major, moderate, negligible, none. So this is very critical. Data access. Payment processing is integration. No, because payment processing also is if you have used the PayPal and payment everything
It's not one liner. Does it mean to initiate the name of KYC or like are we
maybe
smart?
can be major, can be critical.
Not just specifically what does your vendor risk management initiative look like, right? This is exactly what it's going to do. This is how we can measure it, right? This is when we plan to achieve it by. It's definitely achievable. It's relevant, right? Because of our environment, and then this is our time frame as far as when we plan to have it implemented.
What I understand, I think KYC is more of like financial institution. Because it's
Know your customer? Yeah.
KYC is the vendor for financial institution.
Yeah. So KYC is a technology called Know Your Customer that's used that's part of that out of band management to validate their customers who are they say they are, but they outsource that instead of having in-house technology to do it, they outsource it to you or to you, right? So now they got to manage you and you to say, okay, for you guys providing the KYC services to Meridian SG, these are the things that Meridian SG needs to make sure is in place to manage you, right? Yeah, so that's basically saying, okay, we outsource. Don't worry so much on KYC and the payment processing and the core banking itself. Focus more on, okay, these are 3 vendors we had to outsource our functions to. That means we have to have a vendor management program in place to manage these 3 vendors, and we need to manage their risk. So because we have to manage their risk, this is what the initiative is going to look like. Right. So specifically, this is what we're going to do for these three vendors that we're managing. Right. So that's the smart. That's. But then you take that by saying, okay, the cyber risk lens, because of what they're doing, this is how we're going to manage this. We're going to send them a security questionnaire that asks these very specific questions. Are they compliant to these frameworks? Are they doing, what kind of integration do they need to do into our environment? What kind of role-based access control do they need? How are they doing it for their own companies? Like those are, that's where you're starting to be specific with how you're going to go about this initiative, right? How do you measure it? Yeah. How do you measure that your vendors are compliant? Like, what are you doing to be able to measure that? Yes, they are doing things they say they do. Hey, I don't have ISO. I plan to get in 6 months. How are you measuring that? All right, how are you following up in 6 months to make sure they got their ISO? Yeah, it's okay. The idea wasn't for you to finish, because that's the point. It was just for you to start to think about, if I needed to implement this, based off what we covered, how would I go about doing it? Yeah. So, yeah, by the way, everybody, no, I didn't expect anybody to finish, right? It was just to get you talking about it, thinking about it, right? And to start to try to put something sketched out in place, even if it's just the SMART methodology, right? Even if it's just making sure the 3 factors are in place, at least there's something, right? How you go about, what I'm curious to see is, you know, which ones did you guys focus on the most? We'll start with you 3. How did you guys, what was your guys' focus?
Because I understand, but I'm just the person who can explain better.
Okay, we are group 3. We are 3 of us. First of all, thanks very much for making us understand. Okay, now we are in the initiative to do the vendor risk program.
Correct.
It is an initiative that is being considered in the top of the board. We are on the C levels here.
Correct.
What we identified, basically the English, the literature says outsources. So when it comes to outsources, no matter what, it is a responsibility because PDPA and TRM responsibilities cannot be avoided when you use the word outsources.
Correct.
So it is a major headache of maintaining SG, state number 1. So the initiative, the smart one-liner, okay, we are thinking along the timeline.
Okay.
Timeline is very, very important.
Okay.
Like 6 months to 1 year.
Okay.
It will be a fair advantage and the type of money they have, basically the top level give the money to us ready.
Okay.
The outcome is by when, for whom? It is for both the company and the customers benefited.
Okay.
The outcome is in 1 to 6 months to 1 year time.
Okay.
So the outcome is better image of Meridian SG as far as the vendor risk program is concerned in the cyber security arena. The cyber risk lens apply the 3 factors. Okay, the KYC, payment processing and core banking, this structure falls under all the 3. Data access, basically KYC falls under data access.
Okay.
Payment processing falls under integration architecture because when the payment is a process, then there are many systems involved. So we call it as an architecture.
Okay.
Understanding. And core banking is a regulatory exposure because core banking involves 3 sections. First is front level, back level, operational level, and it's a loop.
Okay.
So we put it under the regulatory. So compliance anchor, which obligation does this satisfy? Both PDPA section, all section and addendums, there are 11 obligations of PDPA, and in MAS there are many sections of PDPA, and ISO is nice to have a sweet spot but not required. But PDPA and MAS TRM as a requirement, regulatory requirement. So these 2 they have to take care, and the risk levels we have identified are critical. All the 3 are critical areas. The KYC, payment processing and core banking. Maybe KYC can be a major problem, but payment processing and core banking are critical issues.
Okay.
And if they do not address it correctly, or if they are thinking about paying money, probably it will lead to reputational loss, operational loss, and a fine based on the MAS. So they have to take some action, not in the talking method, whether it is really implemented, the initiative is implemented. So our suggestion to Madrid is that quickly pay us the money, we will do the work for you. Simple like that. Thank you so much.
Very nice. All right. All that in 6 minutes. Wow. All right. Imagine if I gave you an hour. How about you guys? How'd you guys do?
Yeah, so we, based on the initiative of the Spark One Liner, we actually, what we're going to do is going to come up with a questionnaire that we're going to send to the vendor.
Okay.
Basically, we focus on the 3 factor, which is the data access, integration architecture, and regulatory exposure.
Okay.
So the measurable ones, we'll see what is their score based on their architecture, and then we actually require additional information needed. On the achievable side, we request for them to submit any of the compliance of internal audits or reports or even internal audits. And on the relevant side,
Okay, so we'll ask the part of the questionnaire. We'll also try to give them questions to see what are the relevance, the experience in handling certain threats and all that.
Okay.
We've got those 3 questions.
Sure.
Those 3 key points, and as well as having those tied to the certifications or any requirements
Mhm.
they have, such as the obligations, that whether they have PDA, so they can't just say they have to show us.
Yeah.
And that's why we also decided that for timeline, right, we'll give them 2 months to assess everything, give us all the documentation of all their past experience, including statements or statements from their customers or feedback.
Okay. Nice. Okay. Okay. How about you two guys?
We focus on the risks, the cyber risk events,
Okay.
which split into three: the data risks, cyber risks, and also the compliance risks.
Okay.
So data risk would be the exposure of the data and unauthorized access of the vendor access. As for cyber risk, we focus on the supply chain attacks
Okay.
and also weak controls on the web in terms of the security. And as for the compliance, we have the PDPA non-compliant, and we have the MAS TRM gaps, and also the ISO findings possibly. And then we have what we're going to improve all the security program. We're going to do the vendor inventories. And then we do classification as well, the next one. And then the next step will be the security assessments.
Okay.
And then we do the integration review of the vendor. And followed by risk treatment. And also the last one will be monitoring towards all the implementations.
Very good. Very good. Excellent. You guys did a lot in 6 minutes. There's companies to this day haven't done that. What you guys did in 6 minutes, companies haven't done it all. And that's the point. That's the point. You know, even if you just start to think about it, you're already doing more than a lot of companies are doing. And that's the hope, right? That's one of the takeaways. Maybe tomorrow, that could be your takeaway. What am I doing for the vendors I deal with? You know, have we sent out security questions? Do we have an inventory of who they are? Right? What do they do for us? Is it all just contractual, or do we actually have other things to hold them, you know, hold them responsible for material risks? We get fined, they get fined, right? Or maybe they get fired, whatever the case may be. Is there anything? Meridian SG had nothing but a contractual obligation. Hey, these are the commercial terms. That's it. So good job. Good job. Well done. So that's the walkaway. That's the phase 2 walkaway of being able to improve your security program. These are things you should be thinking about, right? Taking those control gaps, right? Running them through the 6 elements, knowing that's not a project list, right? But this is an improvement to a continuous improvement to your program. You're operationalizing this. You never arrive. You are constantly improving. And by taking those gaps and translating them into initiatives, pass them through SMART, right? Which you guys are doing, which is excellent. You guys didn't just give me a one-line answer. You guys actually put thought into it, specificity into it. You know, is it achievable? Is it measurable? Is it relevant? Is it time-bound? You know, you guys all talked about how you guys use the cyber lens. And that's important. That's very important. And so, and keep in mind, right? There's still going to be constraints. There's still going to be governance constraints. There's still going to be compliance constraints. Maybe your program is too rigid, right? And so your third-party provider says, no, I'm not going to agree to this. So then now you're dealing with some more governance constraints, right? Or maybe you go to your board and say, hey, look, this is how we're going to improve our security program. And the board says, wait a minute. I know those guys. They're not going to go for this. We're going to have to go hire someone that's going to cost us 3 times the price to comply to this. You guys need to figure out how to be a little more lenient. Are you sure that this is required for MAS TRM? Are you sure this is required for PDPA? Right? Can you show me how much the fine would be? Because maybe I'm willing to take the fine to stay with these guys. Maybe that's less expensive than me going to hire somebody else who can comply, and it's going to cost me 4 times. Constraints, right? You're just trying to do your job and protect the business. But there's so many factors that you still have to take into consideration that you have to, play this politics game. So, I would argue that a lot of GRC people become great politicians. They do. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of phase 2. If you guys want to take, we are, because I sped run phase 2 a little bit, so we got through it a lot faster. So we have some extra time. If you guys want to take a 5-10 minute break, by all means, feel free. And then we'll jump into the last phase. Last phase is going to be about 30-35 minutes, and then we'll wrap up and we'll get into a Q&A session. Man, y'all killed that activity, man. I'm proud of y'all. Y'all nailed it. I'll have to check to see if Equinet's policy is to release the slides. I'm not sure. But that's a good question. I was thinking about that. I'm like, do the students get access to this? Let me go find out. That's a good question. Because I know I'm recording it, so maybe they just give you access to the recording. I'm not sure, but let me double check on that.
Cikgu telefon nak saya cakap dengan dia tak?
Okay.
Jatuh
Okay.
Thanks.
Oh, hey.
Just something.
All right. Appreciate you coming, man. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Hello. So some of the students want to know, will this material be available after today?
Oh, we will usually share the workshop slides.
So they can't get the slides?
Yeah, we will
Okay.
be sending them the workshop slides plus the video recording.
Oh, even better.
Yeah, but it will take some time lah.
It's okay. They were just wondering if they would have access to it after this. Okay. Good stuff.
I just ask the attendance you want in the computer.
Sorry? Oh, yourself? Yeah.
You're almost there, man. You're almost there. Last phase, and we're almost out of here. It's heavy stuff, man. GRC can be tough. Can be heavy to go through. So. Okay, you can do it. Chayo. Okay, everybody. All right. Just real quickly, apparently the slides and the recording will be available to everybody, just so you know. Thank goodness for the people that couldn't stay. So hopefully they find value in it.